Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Schrank. I am the Director of Civics at Work here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I'm honored to be leading a conversation today with Dante Chinni, who leads the American Communities Project based at the Michigan State University School of Journalism. Dante, thank you so much for being with us here today.
I'm happy to be here. I hope we can have a really good conversation. I'll do most of the talking, but I don't want to do all the talking.
Great. Well, I'd like to start the conversation with the latest research that you published on understanding America in 2024, hopes, fears, and the connections that shape community perceptions. So for me, the biggest takeaway was, that despite Americans feeling very pessimistic about the nation's future, they simultaneously remain quite hopeful about their own futures. And I know there's so many wonderful findings, and we're so excited to kind of delve into it. So I'll hand it over to you to share with us some of the highlights, and then we'll go into the Q&A after that.
Well, thanks a lot. That's correct. Let me go run through the slides again. Like, I don't want this to just be me talking at people, but I find like when work we do, it's helpful to show some people the data, the images, and there's a lot of numbers. Anyway, we are in the American Communities Project, the second year of a 3-year grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to try to understand division in America, what we call American fragmentation, how the country is kind of pulling apart in different ways at the community level, how some people see the world one way, some people see the world another. This is the second survey. The first survey I did was trying to understand like kind of where the fault lines were. And the second survey was trying to understand a little bit of what's driving some of the differences. So what we did in this is try to focus on hopes and fears. Like, what is it that Americans feel good about, and where are the concerns? And when you go through this, some definite trends emerge. Let me just quickly outline the survey. First, click like that. Just so quickly, this is what the American Communities Project map of the country looks like. What we've done is we've taken the 3,100 counties in the country, roughly 3,100, and broken them into 15 different types of communities. So everything from big cities to aging farmlands to graying America, college towns, where I am today. I'm in East Lansing, Michigan right now, military posts, all sorts of different communities. And then we work with Ipsos, our partner, to survey all these places so we get a statistically significant sample in each one of these 15 different types on a host of different questions. And let's go through some of those findings really quickly. This is for the nerds in the audience who understand the methodologies to show it exists. Happy to share it with people afterwards if they're interested in it. Going through the idea of hopes, I think the first thing that really jumps out here is if you ask people, do they consider themselves to be optimistic or pessimistic, generally speaking? Most people consider themselves to be pretty optimistic. And look, the work we do, the thing that really jumps out of this is the difference between the types. And on some of these questions, there just isn't a lot of difference. Like, some of these findings are fairly uniform. And again, this is still, when I look at these data, this is a country that still looks pretty hopeful, right? It takes a lot to say you're an optimistic person in 2024, considering some of the things we're going through right now. But across almost all the types, across all the types, you can see well over 50% consider themselves to be optimistic people. Why are they optimistic? Well, that's a different question. When you make it about the people in the community, where they live, their personal lives, what's driving the optimism? The question is, how hopeful are you about the following? This is combination, these percentages here, of very hopeful and somewhat hopeful. Their personal futures, as you can see how high those numbers are. You're talking about 80% or more across the board, right? Those are pretty good numbers. But then you start to go, you take it one step removed from the person and make it about the community. You start to see some real differences here, right? The numbers come down. First of all, you're not all in the 80s anymore. Some places are dropping down into the 70s. And you see real differences, like, for instance, Native American lands, still high, 71%, but down quite a bit from where they were in the individual question and down even from the national average. Then you go a little further away. So not you, not just your community, but the how you feel about future generations, your children, other people's children. And you can see the numbers drop a little further again, dropping below the 60s, and some places a little lower than the 60s. You're starting to drop into territory where people aren't feeling quite so good about everything about their lives. Then you take it even further away. Let's talk about not just you, not just your community, not just your children, but what about the United States? And the numbers really come down quite a bit. You can see the long-term future of the United States numbers look dark. These are not positive numbers in a lot of these places. They're not all completely negative, but again, these are if you're feeling very hopeful or somewhat hopeful, you can see how far some of these numbers come down. And then you talk about the future of the United States in the next couple of years. Again, these are not positive numbers. So if you're looking at what's driving the optimism in the country, people still feel pretty good about themselves, about their communities, and about their children to some extent. When you push it out further than that in the United States, across the board, the numbers come down. We honestly think this is a pretty significant finding because these places are very different from each other. The difference between the big cities and the aging farmlands, two of the communities you see on there, they're a little different on this question, long-term future of the United States, but these are radically different places. Think of New York City, which is one of the big cities here, Manhattan, and then rural Iowa. They feel differently about these things, but they're still mostly aligned, We're surprised at the level of uniformity across on these questions. The reasons for optimism really being, really self-oriented, these, again, which of the following are you generally optimistic about the future, if at all? Select up to 3, gave them this list of things. What are they optimistic about? People think their lives are pretty good. Your faith or religion, this answer really popped in different places, particularly African-American South. You see how high that number is. 54% say that's something that really fuels their optimism. People are generally good. We thought we might see a little higher answer on this. Really worth noting, however, that the one community where people really do think above other people are generally good, is the LDS communities, which there could be a number of things driving that. Could just be generally a sunnier disposition. The other way of thinking about it is these are places where you tend to be around people who are similar to you. It's a much more homogenous community. Maybe that's one reason why people in the community. You go to the same church, feel a little better about them. Then you look at the other things. The other reasons people feel optimistic about the future, and the numbers start to go down. And they go down quite a bit. Go further than that and talk about the reasons for pessimism. This is why you feel pessimistic about the future. Which of these things? And I think everybody can see that top answer, which is not especially positive. The country seems to be falling apart. That's a very negative sentiment, and it's high really across the board. Leaders never seem to be able to do the right thing. A little lower. These responses really make us think that we've got real concerns in this country with the future. About the future of the country. We saw this last year. We did the first round of the survey, and we asked people about right track, wrong track. With their lives, do they feel personally their lives are on the right track or wrong track? Do they feel their communities on the right track or wrong track? Do they feel the country's on the right track or wrong track? When it came to the personal, like, is your life on the wrong track? Everybody seemed to say their life was on the right track. Came to the community, slightly lower, but most people, again, seemed to think their community was on the right track. But then you got to the country, and the numbers just shifted completely. And why is that? That's something we tried to understand. We think one thing may be that the country is just a very big and complicated and divided place. And frankly, just the way that we're all butting our heads right now. If you're a Trump supporter, you can find reasons to say the country's on the wrong track. If you're a Harris supporter, you can find reasons to say the country's on the wrong track. We think that's being played out again in these data. The country seems to be falling apart because because we just can't seem to come together and solve big issues, which is, again, the next question, the next response on here. Leaders don't seem to be able to do the right thing, which I think in many people's minds is come together to solve problems. Some of the differences. This is something we came back to some of these questions before. We asked some of these last year. A sense of pessimism and alienation in a broader sense. Do you agree? This is, again, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? And these are a combination of strongly agree or somewhat agree. The highest answer you can see on here, 54%, again, more and more, I don't identify with what America has become. 54% of people overall. But then look at some of these other communities. Evangelical hubs, you're getting up near 70%. Rural middle America, also quite high. Society is changing too fast. Very high in the Native American, very high in the Native American lands, very high in the evangelical hubs. America is a place I feel free to say what I think and feel. Numbers come down a little bit. the one thing that everybody does seem to agree with is that they do not believe that the country is steadily improving, which is the bottom line on there. These responses to us, again, show the dichotomy of this survey, that people feel their lives are going in the right direction, but there's this broader sense that the country just cannot get its act together. Like this is a very dour public that we're looking at with some of the data in this poll. This is, again, goes to something that I think is really important for everybody on this call, everybody watching this. When you talk about positive or negative impact, what people feel, again, optimistic about, a different way of thinking about it, groups that have a positive or negative impact, the closer you are to the person in their community, the closer you are to the person on the ground, the higher you're going to get a positive impact. So local businesses, small businesses have a positive impact. Civic or volunteer groups in the community, again, positive. Church religious organizations, positive. Even local government, narrowly positive. Narrowly, though no impact. I guess it has the plurality there. But then you start shifting into national businesses. The local news media, it's the one thing, even the news media can't break through. There'll be the one thing where even the news media, the local news media doesn't do well, though you can see who's at the very bottom there, the national news media, something I unfortunately am very familiar with. Just the general lack of the negative impact and the unhappiness. And also you can see, by the way, on there, the national government, which rates higher than the national media, but those are not positive figures. One thing that we thought was really important to try to understand some of what we're looking at and the hopes and fears, and because some of hopes and fears is about who you know and who you're connected to, is how we connect with each other. So we asked a lot of questions in this survey about how often people interact with other people. This is people selecting daily, weekly, or monthly, right? How often do you connect, messaging or texting with friends and others, attending a community event, volunteering in your community? I will say, as somebody in a college town right now, that spending time with friends in person number, I thought would, if you look on the right side of this chart, you see the communities that scored higher. I honestly thought I'd see more of the college towns in there. The fact that they're not in there is a little disappointing to me, frankly, and I think it's something to think about the future generations of this country. I think we all used to think about the time in college as a place where you just go and breezily walk by somebody's dorm room and have a conversation. It does appear that doesn't happen as much anymore. I will say, from being on a college campus, it doesn't happen as much anymore. When I went to college many years ago now, when you were in your dorms, the way you told people you wanted to talk to people was you kept the door open and you would just hang out in there. That's not happening anymore. So the idea that so much of human interaction, even in a place in a college campus where everybody is near each other and everybody's, there's a large number of people in the same age group, they're communicating more and more over cell phones. There are less kind of random chance interactions or hanging out with people. We wanted to ask people, because we have obviously problems with political division in this country, whether or not they know people from both sides of the aisle, or whether they just know Republicans or Democrats. If you look, the purple on this is if you know both Republicans and Democrats. The blue is only Democrats, red's only Republicans, and I guess they just don't ask people their political affiliation. Would be the gray, the none. I think it's interesting when you look at this chart, the big cities and the evangelical hubs. Big cities, heavily Democratic, evangelical hubs, heavily Republican, both score lower than average on knowing both Democrats and Republicans. And then you look at who they know in the blue and the red above. Big cities, they're more likely to just know Democrats. Evangelical hubs, more likely to just know Republicans. But across the board, it is good that a lot of people know Democrats and Republicans. I would say, frankly, I think there would have been a time these numbers would have been higher. I do think before we self-segregated ourselves, there would have been a time where we were just much more likely to, even if we didn't talk about politics, or we felt we could talk about politics in a way that didn't, I don't know, but was likely to ruffle feathers. I think we would more likely know people are Democrats and Republicans, and it wouldn't be such a big deal. I do think the numbers are a little, while it is good that it's about 50% nationally, and in some of these places quite a bit higher, it's lower in some, I would have thought overall the numbers would have been higher. So it's a little bit of a disappointment in terms of helping to bridge these gaps, because one thing we think about bridging gaps is you're much more likely to be able to do that and make connections when the other side isn't the other. And the other side is much less likely to be the other if you know them. Okay, we went much further than that and tried to ask people, who do you know? So for each one of these, for each community type, we asked, do you know a Republican? Do you know a Democrat or conservative? Or do you know a Republican or conservative? Do you know a Democrat or liberal? Do you know an immigrant from another country? Those numbers, again, quite low when you consider how large the immigrant population is in the United States. Remember, that's not undocumented immigrants. That's just immigrants, somebody born in another place. Member of a different race or ethnic group, racial or ethnic group. Member of different religious group. Nobody knows journalists, which again, it's why do we keep including journalists in here? Because frankly, the lack of trust in the media has become a real problem. Because basically somebody has to try to tell the story of the country, and if we're not going to trust journalists, and we're just going to go through TikTok and social media, which is fine, but it's going to create some problems. People say they're much more likely, they feel that they know people on both ends of the economic spectrum for the most part, right? There are differences at the community level, but we were a little surprised. The LGBTQ number was higher. Most places you're getting close to 50%, which again, I think says something about how the country has evolved around LGBTQ issues over the past decade, 15, 20 years. I want to zip through this. We do have this, we'll skip through some of these questions about news. Again, I'm happy to share this presentation with anybody afterwards if they want it. We do feel news consumption is a really big issue in terms of trying to understand how people see the world the way they do. Some conclusions. It takes a little time to study this chart, but these are, if you go to sources frequently for news and information, how likely you are to agree with these days. You feel like a stranger in my own country, or how you feel about the future of the United States in the next couple of years. Thing that really does jump out of this is people more likely to watch conservative media are more likely to say they feel like a stranger in their own country. That's obviously a bit of a problem. When you get to the other side, it's a little more evened out, but that one about the conservative media does really pop in this set of numbers. This is also something that we thought was really interesting. This is whether or not you're hopeful about the United States in the next couple of years compared to how often you are watching cable news or on social media or reading online news. You can see in terms of being hopeful for the United States, the green line, that's just reading online news, fairly flat. Watching cable news, you have a little bit of a spike in terms of hopefulness if you just watch it 2 to 3 hours, which seems crazy to me. That's a lot of time to spend watching cable news, but then it just drops precipitously. And I think the most interesting here is the social media number, which suggests the longer somebody's on social media, the less likely they are to be optimistic about the future of the country. This is just something to keep in mind as people turn more and more to their phones for news and knowledge. I want to hit on this really quickly because on a different question, and then I really want to wrap up with something quick before we go to Q&A. But we asked people these questions about who you know and how they impact how you see the world. This is with a journalist and elected official. We had another question in this about what you saw about whether or not you know an immigrant. And then we had a series of true-false questions. And the true-false statement was undocumented immigrants are more likely to commit violent crime, true or false. That's false. The answer to that is false. The places, almost no community got that right. Most people in almost every community believe that undocumented immigrants were more likely to commit violent crime than other people. The 2 exceptions, or the 3 exceptions where it was a little lower were the big cities, the urban suburbs, and the Hispanic centers. And those are all places where people were more likely to say they knew an immigrant. It goes to this larger point of the connections we have, how important they are. If you know an immigrant, not an undocumented immigrant, just an immigrant, you're less likely to buy into the idea that undocumented immigrants are likely to commit violent crime. It's just a fact to take away from trying to understand how people perceive the world and who they know. Okay, I want to run through this very quickly because I'm at the end of my time, but this is really important, I think. we did give people 9 statements, true, false statements, and ask them to, I'm going to read you factual statements. You tell me whether they're true or false. Out of all these 15 community types, and again, these places are radically different from each other, they only got 2 across the board, got 2 statements correct. 1, inflation remains at above historic averages, which is obviously true. And migration across the US-Mexico border is at or near historic highs. Again, also true. Almost every community got that. But then you move into other questions. The unemployment rate is at or near historic lows. No community was above 50% on that. The undocumented immigrants question, which you see on here, no community. Some got close. The urban suburbs got the 50% answering that correctly, but most places were below that. And I think really important to keep in mind with the election coming around, there are tens of thousands of documented cases of voter fraud in the last election. The number of communities, not a single community got the answer on that correct, which is false. Not a single community got over 50%, including communities that voted for Joe Biden. So places that lean Democratic, they still believe the story that there were tens of thousands of undocumented cases of documented cases of voter fraud in 2020. To us, that's these are troubling findings because it suggests that it's very easy to introduce misinformation and disinformation into the basically information bloodstream of the country, and very hard to knock it out once it gets in there. But also, when we looked at these questions, each one of these, 1 through 9, there was a positive answer and a negative answer. I mean, not just true, false, but like, inflation is high. That's true. It's also negative, right? It's unfortunate. That the bit about voter fraud, that's false. But it's the choice that people made, which was true, which was incorrect, was the more negative view. On almost all of these questions, the more negative point of view, when you ask them these questions about the country, they chose the negative answer. And I think this is a broader question. We have to have a conversation. All this personal optimism that people have about their lives, we've got to get them to try to see the country in a different sort of way, because when you take it away from the personal and you make it about the country, the feelings are much less optimistic, and it's affecting, you could even say infecting, the way they see the country in a broader sense. And I'm going to stop there. That's enough. I've already talked too much at you. I would like to hear questions from people. Just generally, when we talk about this stuff, it raises a lot of questions in people's minds.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dante, for such an enlightening conversation and a presentation. And you really are giving us a lot to think about. We have a number of questions coming in, so we're just going to dive right into these. The first one that we received is, what can we do to change the current trends, especially regarding the reliance on digital interactions and lack of optimism in your findings?
The digital interaction, this is a question I have a lot. I have 2 kids in college right now, and they're the next generation, and they're leaning toward digital communication. That's a time when you should be having the random experiences and interactions that cause you to see the world differently. How do we do it? I honestly think it might have to be something where we literally work to say that, like, put phones away, like trying to teach people that, like, you don't always have to be on your phone. Go have an event, put the phone on do not disturb, don't look at your phone. Literally try to set goals for yourself to stay off your phone every once in a while and be present, which I think is hugely important, even though as a journalist I myself have times doing that. I have trouble doing that sometimes anyway.
Absolutely. I think we all do.
Yeah.
So we're getting a couple questions as well about, the rise in mis and disinformation that you mentioned. So given especially that this is such a heavy business audience, what can businesses specifically do to offset this misinformation?
I will say it was one of the most disturbing findings in this poll, because look, you can feel the way you do about the election. Any way you feel about it, that's fine. The bottom line is there were not tens of thousands of cases of voter fraud in this election. And I do think this is one thing where the media has done a pretty good job at knocking this down, trying to knock it down over and over and over again, yet it doesn't seem to make any impact with people. I'm not sure what the answer is, because when I looked at these questions, what it suggested to me is once a bit of bad information got into the ecosystem, the information ecosystem, it's really hard to knock out. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is that for business owners is be as vigilant as possible, knock it down as quickly as possible. Because frankly, like once it gets in there, because people get in there and even if it gets knocked down, they keep repeating it. it just becomes accepted as fact, even when the evidence is that it's incorrect. So be vigilant and try to knock things down as quickly as you possibly can.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good advice. And then some folks are asking as well, how can they, as a, either a small or large business, build on the optimism for their personal? How can they contribute to some of the optimism we're seeing?
So my question is, how do we, I think it's a really good question. My question is, how do we take the personal optimism that everybody has and make them put that on the world in a larger sense? And I think the one way to do it would be, look, if everybody feels optimistic about themselves and their current situation, maybe the way to to raise optimism is to get these people to talk to each other and to basically get people who don't normally communicate with each other to communicate with each other. Because maybe if they did that, the concerns they had about everything and that everything was basically going to hell and in the broader sense outside of their personal lives, they'd feel differently about that. If they could talk to other people and say, oh, well, my life is going okay. I talked to this person who's very different from me and their life seems to be going okay. Maybe there's something going on here that we're missing. And I mean, I don't want to say the media has to focus on good news stories. I mean, look, there's always room for some good news, always. But like, it can't be, the night in the news can't be, cute puppies born today, which is a wonderful thing. But like, there's bad stuff too. So the news it can't be just reporting on the positive. But I think the one way of maybe tackling it in terms of the media part of this is to talk about exactly what's in the survey, that like, look, everybody thinks that things are going okay for them. So why do we all think everything's going to hell? If everybody's life is going okay, then why do we think things are going so poorly for the country? That's a real question that I think people, if you frame the question to them, they would have to at least consider and maybe come up with a more optimistic view of where things really are.
Great. And are there businesses who, businesses or leaders more broadly that are doing this well, or, that are setting an example of kind of putting forth a vision of optimism that you can think of?
So, I mean, there are people, I know there are some content creators and providers that try to do some of this stuff. There's this thing called Upworthy that try to spread the good news, or like there's the ad campaign that you see around, like, optimism, pass it on, or courage, pass it on. These things I think are helpful. The problem is they're going up against just, gale force winds coming in the other direction. So the one way maybe is to businesses banding together to put forward this idea that things really aren't as bad as you think they are. Or maybe, look, we understand there are a lot of problems in the country, a lot of challenges in the country, but that doesn't mean it's doomed, or it doesn't mean everything's terrible. It means that we're Americans and we'll get over this. I think that's the thing that really bothered me about that true-false question, that series of true-false questions. Just the fact that people always usually chose the negative answer to me felt like this is not typical for Americans, right? That's not the way we have been in the past.
Great. And we have time for just about one more question. And so let's see, what makes you optimistic about, you personally optimistic about any trends for the future?
What makes me optimistic? I guess the one thing that makes me optimistic, I'm on a college campus right now and I talk to students. And there's a lot of bright people out there. I mean, I know that a lot of times people look down on the younger generation and like, oh, we were so much better. These kids are really smart. And when I talk to them and I talk to the best students, I feel really hopeful about where things might be going. The other thing I will say is getting people together which we've done a couple times, people from different communities together and having them talk things out. It always makes me feel positive and I come away with a different feeling, but that takes work. That takes a lot of work.
Absolutely. Well, we are at time, but we want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing the insights that you found on this survey. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, but also a lot to feel good about. So thank you so much. And for the audience here today, you can visit the U.S. Chamber Foundation.org to learn more about the Civic Trust, our National Civics Fee, the Civics at Work program, and other ways to get involved in your local community. And again, I'm Jessica Schrank at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.